A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. Alright, here's what Daniel sent us. He wants to talk flashlights again, but this time strictly handheld torches, no headlamps. He's asking, what are 5 brands worth trusting for quality and reliability? What's a reasonable baseline spend for something that'll actually serve you for years? What do Herman and I think about compact flashlights? He wants to focus on practical, occasional use cases, camping trips, power outages, emergencies, where quality and ruggedness matter far more than chasing insane lumen counts or ridiculous throw distances. He also wants to dig into battery technology, whether externally rechargeable cells are always better than built-in ones, and which cell types beyond the 1860-50 are worth knowing about. And then there are some specialized features to cover: red light modes, wide flood patterns, and Nightgore's integrated laser pointers. When do those actually earn their keep? So, a lot of ground to cover. Herman, where do we even start?
You know what? Let's start with the thing that actually motivated this question, which is the moment you reach for a flashlight in the dark and it either works or it doesn't. That's the entire stakes of this conversation. And the frustrating thing is that most people have flashlights that fall into the "it doesn't" category because they bought a $10 or $15 thing from a hardware store checkout display and figured, hey, it's a flashlight. How complicated can it be?
I will say, I have personally experienced the click-nothing moment at 2 in the morning during a power cut, and it is a special kind of misery. You're standing in total darkness. You're clicking a flashlight that is absolutely not going to turn on, and you're reconsidering every purchase decision you've ever made.
And that's the thing, right? The gap between a cheap hardware store torch and a purpose-built tool is enormous, and it's not really about brightness. It's about whether the switch works after 3 years of sitting in a drawer, whether the battery contacts haven't corroded, whether the lens is still clear. Those are boring engineering problems that cheap manufacturers just don't solve.
By the way, today's script is being generated by Claude Sonnet 4.6, so if anything sounds unusually well structured, that's why.
Ha! Blame the AI. So let's frame this properly, because Daniel's prompt is really well targeted. We're talking about handheld torches specifically for practical, occasional use. Not a tactical weapon-mounted light, not a search and rescue beacon, not something you strap to your head for trail running. A torch you grab when the power goes out, take camping, keep in your car, or put in your emergency kit. And for that use case, the spec sheet is almost irrelevant.
The lumen wars drove me absolutely insane for a while. You'd see these listings, 10,000 lumens, 15,000 lumens, and you'd think, what are these people illuminating? The surface of the moon?
The thing is, those numbers are real. They're just useless for the use case we're describing. A torch running at its maximum output for 30 seconds before it throttles down to protect itself from overheating isn't a practical tool. For actual home and camping use, the sweet spot is somewhere between 300 and 1,000 lumens. That range gives you genuinely useful illumination, manageable heat, and runtime that actually lasts. The marketing number is the ceiling, not the floor.
So let's talk about what actually makes a flashlight good. Because I think people anchor on brightness as the proxy for quality, and it's just the wrong proxy.
It really is. The things that matter are build quality, which means aircraft-grade aluminum construction, proper heat sinking so the driver doesn't cook itself, quality LED selection, a reliable switch mechanism, and waterproofing. At the $40 mark, you can get IP68 rated lights, which means fully submersible to 1.5 meters for 30 minutes. Below $20, you're often getting a plastic lens, a switch that'll start failing within a year, and heat sinking that's basically non-existent. The light might be bright for 30 seconds, but it's not a reliable tool.
So the baseline spend is, what, $40 to $60?
That's the sweet spot, yeah. Below 30, you're gambling. Above 100, you're generally paying for extreme output or niche features rather than meaningfully better reliability. Somewhere in that $40 to $80 range, you're getting aircraft aluminum, IP68 waterproofing, a 50,000-hour LED lifespan, and a driver that manages power intelligently. That's a tool that will outlast multiple cheap flashlights. It's genuinely a buy-it-for-life proposition if you treat it reasonably well.
All right, let's get into the brands, because this is where it gets useful. There are hundreds of flashlight brands. Most of them are garbage, and the enthusiast community has done a lot of work sorting the wheat from the chaff.
I'm Herman Pobbleberry, by the way, for anyone just joining us. And yes, I have spent a deeply unreasonable amount of time on this. So let's go through 5 brands that I would genuinely trust and recommend, and I want to give real reasoning for each one, not just a list.
Starting with?
Starting with Phoenix. If I had to pick one brand and stick with it for the rest of my life, it would probably be Phoenix. They're often called the Toyota of flashlights, which I think is exactly right. They're not the flashiest, they're not the most innovative, they're not the cheapest. What they are is relentlessly reliable. The warranty support is excellent, they're widely available, and their lights perform exactly as specified over years of use. The PD36R is a benchmark model for a reason. It runs on a 21700 cell, puts out around 1600 lumens at max, has USB-C charging built in, and it's the kind of light where you pick it up 5 years from now and it just works.
I've recommended Phoenix to people who are not flashlight enthusiasts at all. People who just want something that works. And the consistent feedback is that it's boring in the best possible way.
Boring is underrated in a tool. The second brand is Streamlight, and Streamlight occupies a different niche. These are the lights that law enforcement and fire services use. They're duty rated, which is a specific standard meaning. They're designed to be dropped on concrete repeatedly, submerged, and generally abused in ways that would kill a consumer light. The ProTac series is the recommendation for emergency and home use. These are lights that have been tested in genuinely high-stakes environments, not just marketing copy, actual field use by people whose lives depend on their gear working.
There's something reassuring about knowing that a light was designed for someone who can't afford for it to fail. That's a different design philosophy than looks cool on a shelf.
The third brand is Olight, and Olight is interesting because they're the most consumer-friendly of the 5. They innovate on ergonomics and charging in ways that the more serious tactical brands don't bother with. The Batten series, particularly the Batten 3 Pro, is a great example. Magnetic charging, excellent beam quality, very compact form factor. Olight also runs the most aggressive promotional deals in the industry, so you can often get their lights at significantly below retail.
The magnetic charging on the Olight stuff is genuinely clever. It's one of those things where you wonder why everyone doesn't do it, and then you realize the answer is probably patents.
Probably, yeah. The fourth brand is Nikkor, and Nikkor is the feature-rich option. They're constantly pushing the boundaries of what a flashlight can do. They have models with built-in displays, multiple light sources, and yes, integrated lasers, which we'll get to. The P series is their professional line, and the engineering in those lights is genuinely impressive. The P23i, for instance, integrates a green laser alongside the main emitter, and that's not a gimmick. It has real utility in specific contexts.
Nikkor is the brand for people who read the entire manual before using something, which, for the record, I do not do.
I know you don't. And that brings me to the fifth brand, which is Zebralight, and Zebralight is the enthusiast's choice. They are not for everyone. The interface is unusual, the form factor is unconventional, and they don't have the marketing presence of the other 4. What they do have is arguably the best driver design in the consumer flashlight market. Their electronics are potted, meaning the circuit boards are encased in epoxy resin, which protects them from shock and moisture at a level that exceeds most IP ratings. The thermal management is exceptional, and the efficiency, meaning how long the battery lasts at a given output, is class-leading. If you're the kind of person who reads white papers on LED efficiency curves, Zebralight is your brand.
And if you're the kind of person who just wants to find your fuse box in the dark?
Phoenix or Streamlight, no question.
Okay, so we have our 5. Phoenix for reliability, Streamlight for professional-grade durability, Olight for consumer-friendly innovation, Niticore for features, and Zebralight for the engineering obsessives. Let's talk about the form factor debate, because I know we actually have different instincts here.
We do, and I think it's worth being honest about it rather than pretending there's one right answer. My instinct is toward compact lights, specifically 1860-50 or 14500 lights that genuinely fit in a pocket. The argument is simple. A light you actually have with you is infinitely more useful than a light sitting on a shelf. The Olight Baton 3 Pro is a great example. It's barely larger than a thick marker. It's got magnetic charging, and it puts out over 1,000 lumens when you need it.
And I'm going to push back on that, because I think there's a real trade-off that gets glossed over. A compact light has less mass, which means less thermal headroom. When you're running a high output, the heat has to go somewhere, and in a tiny aluminum cylinder, it goes into throttling the output down faster. A larger light, something using a 21700 cell, has more mass to absorb heat, runs longer at sustained output, and is more comfortable to hold for extended use. If you're navigating a power outage for an hour, you want something with a bit more body to it.
That's fair. The counter-argument is that most power outage usage is short bursts, not sustained operation. You're not holding the light continuously for an hour, you're using it to find the candles, check the fuse box, locate the camping lantern.
True, but the 21700 lights are not dramatically larger. We're talking maybe 20 millimeters longer and a few millimeters wider than an 1860-50 light. That's not a meaningful size penalty in a home context.
I'll give you that. In the home and emergency context specifically, a 21700 light like the Phoenix PD36R makes a lot of sense. More runtime, better heat management, and the cells are becoming easier to find. My compact preference is more about the lights I carry daily, where the size difference actually matters.
And this is why the use case matters so much. The ideal pocket EDC light and the ideal emergency kit light are probably different objects. We're not saying one size fits all.
The Olight Warrior Mini is a great EDC compact. The Phoenix PD36R is a great home emergency light. They solve different problems. Now let's talk about the failure modes of cheap lights because I think this is instructive.
Oh, this is good.
Take a $20 big box store light, drop it on concrete from waist height. What happens? In many cases, the lens cracks or the impact shifts the battery contacts just enough that the circuit is intermittent or the switch mechanism deforms slightly and starts sticking. A Phoenix PD36R dropped from the same height? The anodized aluminum takes a scratch. The light keeps working. That's not an accident. That's the result of designing to actual drop standards, using proper thread tolerances on the battery tube, and using a switch mechanism that's rated for 100,000 actuations rather than a few thousand.
And the insidious thing about cheap lights is that they often work fine for the first 6 months, which gives you false confidence. The failure happens when you actually need it.
Which is always at 2 in the morning during a power cut.
Always. Okay, let's move into batteries, because this is where I think the episode gets genuinely interesting. The battery is not just the power source, it's really the heart of the product.
This is where I get excited. The battery ecosystem is fascinating and I think massively underappreciated by casual buyers. So let's start with the fundamental question, externally rechargeable versus built-in. And I want to be clear, I have a strong opinion here.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
External is almost always better, and the reason is simple. Lithium cells degrade. Every charge cycle, you lose a small percentage of capacity. After 300 to 500 cycles, most cells are at 70 to 80% of original capacity. After 1,000 cycles, significantly less. This is unavoidable chemistry. Now, in a phone or a laptop, that's a problem, but you typically replace those devices every few years anyway. In a flashlight that you're expecting to last a decade, a sealed battery means the entire product becomes e-waste when the cell degrades past the point of usefulness. With a removable cell, you replace the battery for $10 and the light lives on.
And there's a secondary issue during an extended power outage, which is that if your built-in battery is depleted, you're done. Whereas with removable cells, you can have spares charged and ready. Or in certain dual-fuel configurations, you can run on whatever batteries you can find.
The dual fuel point is really important, and it leads into the cell type discussion. Let's run through the main players. The 1860-50 is still the gold standard. It's a cylindrical lithium-ion cell, 65 millimeters long, 18 millimeters in diameter. Capacity in the range of 3,000 to 3,500 milliamp hours from quality cells. Samsung, LG, Molicel, Sanyo, these are the manufacturers you want. The ecosystem is huge, chargers are everywhere, and the performance is well understood.
The 186050 is like the USB-A of batteries. Everyone has one. Everything supports it. It's not the newest thing, but it's everywhere.
The 21700 is the successor. 70 millimeters long, 21 millimeters diameter, and capacity in the 4,000 to 5,000 milliamp hour range from quality cells. The Molicel P42A, for instance, is a high-drain 21700 that flashlight enthusiasts love. The 21700 is becoming the new standard for higher performance lights because the capacity advantage is meaningful and the size penalty is modest. Phoenix, Nitecore, and others have been transitioning their flagship models to 21700.
How available are 21700 cells compared to 186050?
Much more available than they were a couple of years ago. You can get them from reputable battery vendors online easily, and the flashlight brands themselves often sell matched cells. They're not at the corner store level of availability, but for someone who's investing in a quality flashlight, buying cells online is not a hardship.
What about CR123A? Because I know those come up in the emergency context specifically.
CR123A is interesting because it's a non-rechargeable primary cell, but it has specific advantages that make it relevant for emergency kits. The shelf life is extraordinary, 10 to 12 years, which is much longer than most rechargeable cells. And the temperature performance is exceptional. Lithium-ion cells get unhappy below freezing. Their capacity drops significantly. CR123. A cells work reliably down to minus 40 degrees Celsius. So for a light that's going to sit in a car emergency kit or a bug-out bag and potentially be needed in extreme cold after years of storage, the CR123, a case is real.
There's a whole philosophy around emergency preparedness where you don't want your emergency gear to require maintenance. The CR123A fits that philosophy perfectly.
The trade-off is cost. They're expensive per cell compared to rechargeables, and they're single use. But for a light that might sit unused for 5 years and then need to work in a blizzard, the calculus is different. Streamlight's ProTac series runs on CR123A, and that's not an accident.
Now let's talk about the 14500, because I think this one is underappreciated, and it connects to the dual fuel point you mentioned.
The 14500 is genuinely clever. It's physically identical in size to a standard AA battery, same diameter, same length. But it's a lithium-ion rechargeable running at 3.7 volts versus the 1.5 volts of an alkaline AA. The capacity is around 800 to 900 milliamp hours, which is less than an 186050, but the dual fuel capability it enables is enormously practical. The Aspine Pokelet AA is a great example of this. It's a tiny light that runs on a 14500 rechargeable normally, but if you've depleted your rechargeables and you're 3 days into a power outage, you can drop in standard AA alkalines or NIMH cells that you find at any grocery store.
That's the kind of engineering decision that shows a brand is thinking about real-world use rather than spec sheet optimization. What happens when the ideal scenario breaks down?
And that's the thing about the brands we've been recommending. They make those decisions thoughtfully. They're not optimizing for a single number on a box.
Okay, let's shift to the specialized features, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding here. Red light mode in particular gets dismissed as either a tactical gimmick or a military cosplay feature, and that's not right.
Red light is genuinely useful, and the reason is physiological. Your eyes contain 2 types of photoreceptors, cones for color vision in bright light, and rods for low light vision. The rods contain a photosensitive chemical called rhodopsin, and rhodopsin bleaches out when exposed to bright white light, which is why stepping from a bright room into darkness leaves you effectively blind for several minutes while the rhodopsin regenerates. Red light, at wavelengths above 600 nanometers or so, does not bleach rhodopsin at the same rate, so if you're using red light, your night vision is preserved.
The practical applications of this are more common than people think. Navigating a dark house without waking your family. Reading a map on a camping trip without ruining your ability to see the trail. Astronomy, obviously, which is a huge use case in the enthusiast community. And honestly, even just going to the bathroom in a tent at 3 in the morning without turning your bunkmates into angry zombies.
The camping use case is real. You switch to red light when you're moving around camp, and when you douse it, you can immediately see the stars. With white light, you'd be blind for 20 minutes. That's not trivial.
Does red light work as well for actually illuminating things?
It's dimmer in perceived brightness because your cones, which process color, are less sensitive to red than to white, so it's not as useful for detailed work. But for navigation and orientation, it's more than adequate. Some lights have a dedicated red LED. Some achieve it through a red filter over the main emitter. The dedicated LED approach is better because it doesn't waste the main emitter's output.
Let's talk about beam patterns, because this is another area where the marketing language, throw versus flood, gets thrown around without much explanation of why you'd want one over the other.
The fundamental trade-off is concentration versus coverage. A thrower has a tight focused beam that puts a lot of light at a long distance. A flooder has a wide diffuse beam that illuminates a large area nearby. For practical home use, flood is almost always more useful. If you're navigating a dark house during a power outage, you want to see the entire hallway, not a bright circle in the middle of a dark room. The tight beam of a thrower is like looking through a straw in that context.
The thrower is impressive at a distance demo in a parking lot. The floater is what you actually want when you're looking for your keys.
The optics behind this are interesting. Reflector-based designs tend to produce more throw because a deep parabolic reflector collimates the light tightly. TIR optics, total internal reflection lenses, are typically floodier and more efficient because they capture more of the emitter's output and direct it forward rather than letting side spill go to waste. For home and camping use, a TIR optic with a wide flood pattern is generally the better choice.
Some lights offer multiple beam options, either through physical diffuser attachments or through optic choices. Is that worth considering?
It's a nice feature if it's executed well. Some lights have a built-in diffuser you can flip over the head to convert a thrower into a lantern-style flood. That's genuinely versatile. But I'd rather have a light optimized for the use case I actually have than a compromise that tries to do everything.
Now, the integrated lasers. Because this is where I expected to roll my eyes and then found myself actually persuaded.
Nitecore has been the main brand pushing this. The P23i and the EDC17 integrate a green or red laser alongside the main flashlight emitter. And yes, when I first heard about it, my reaction was, why? But there are legitimate use cases.
Walk me through them.
The most compelling one for everyday professional use is what I'd call precision pointing. If you're a contractor, a building inspector, or an electrician working in a dark attic or crawl space, you often need to direct someone's attention to a specific point, a crack in a joist, a wiring issue, a structural problem. With a flashlight, you can illuminate the general area. With an integrated laser, you can point to the exact spot without having to walk over and touch it. That's a real efficiency gain in a professional context.
I hadn't thought about the inspector use case. That's genuinely practical.
The emergency signaling use case is also real. A green laser is visible for miles under clear conditions. If you're lost or in distress, a laser pointed toward a search aircraft or a distant rescue team is far more visible than a flashlight beam. It's a different tool than a mirror signal, but it works at night, which a mirror doesn't.
What about the presentation use case? Because I've seen these marketed for presentations.
That's the weakest use case in my opinion. A standalone laser pointer is $10 and does that job perfectly. You don't need an $80 flashlight for it. But I don't think the marketing for presentations invalidates the other use cases. The integrated laser on a Nitecore P series is genuinely useful for the professional and emergency contexts, even if the presentation angle is a bit of a stretch.
How does the integration affect the main flashlight function? Is there a trade-off?
Minimal. The laser adds a small module to the head and adds a gram or two of weight. The main emitter and driver are unaffected. The interface typically maps the laser to a separate switch or a long press combination so you don't activate it accidentally. The execution in the current Nitecore models is clean.
And safety.
These are Class 3 A lasers typically under 5 milliwatts. They're not safe to point at eyes, obviously, and they carry the standard laser safety warnings. But they're not at the level of power that creates immediate eye injury from a momentary exposure. Standard caution applies.
Alright, let's take stock of where we are and then move into actual takeaways. We've covered the brand landscape, the form factor debate, battery technology, and specialized features. What's the through line here?
The through line is that the flashlight market has largely solved the reliability problem at the $40 to $80 price point, and the brands we've named are the ones that have actually solved it rather than just claiming to. The question for a buyer is really about matching the tool to the use case. And the use case Daniel's prompt is focused on, home emergency, camping, occasional practical use, is actually one of the better defined use cases in the market.
Let's be concrete. If someone is listening to this and they want to make a decision, what do we actually tell them?
First, budget $40 to $80. That's the range where you're getting real quality. Below that, you're gambling on build quality. Above that, you're paying for features you probably don't need for this use case.
Second,
Choose a model with externally replaceable rechargeable cells. Either 1860-50 or 21700, both are excellent. Avoid built-in sealed batteries unless you're consciously accepting that the light is semi-disposable on a 3 to 5 year horizon. The ability to replace the cell is the difference between a tool and a gadget.
third,
Match the battery type to your preparedness philosophy. If you're building a pure emergency kit where the light might sit unused for years, consider either a light that accepts CR123A primaries or a dual fuel design like the acid beam Pokelit that can run on standard AA batteries as a fallback. If you're building a camping and home use light that you'll maintain and keep charged, an 1860-50 or 21700 light from Phoenix, Olight, or Nightcore is the better choice.
fourth,
Think about beam pattern before you buy. For home and camping use, you almost certainly want a floody light, not a thrower. Read the reviews, look at beam shots, and prioritize area illumination over maximum distance. A light that blinds you with a tight hotspot in a small room is not a useful home tool.
fifth,
Consider red light mode if you camp or spend time outdoors at night. It's not a gimmick. It's physiologically sound and practically useful. Not every light has it, but it's worth seeking out if nighttime navigation and preserving night vision are relevant to your use case.
and what's the one practical action you'd give someone right now?
Audit your current flashlights. Take them out of whatever drawer they're living in and actually test them. Click them on, check the battery, check the beam. If they're sub $30 hardware store lights, or if they have sealed batteries that you've never checked, that's a gap in your preparedness. You don't need to buy 5 lights. You need one good light that you know works. Spend the $50 on a Phoenix or a Streamlight and actually keep it charged.
I want to add something to that, which is the interface point, because I think it gets glossed over. A flashlight in an emergency is often used by whoever is home. That might be a partner, a child, an elderly parent. The interface needs to be simple enough that someone who has never thought about flashlights can pick it up and make it work.
That's a genuinely important point. Some lights, particularly in the Nightcore and Zebra Light range, have sophisticated multi-mode interfaces that require a manual. That's fine for an enthusiast who's read the documentation. It's not fine for a light that's going to be grabbed in a panic by someone who's never seen it before. Phoenix and Streamlight tend to have more intuitive interfaces. Olight's interface is generally good for casual users. If you're buying a light for household emergency use rather than personal carry, simplicity of interface should be a real criterion.
The Zebra Light is a perfect example of this tension. Incredible engineering, genuinely excellent light. But the UI is its own language. You would not hand a Zebra Light to someone in an emergency and expect them to figure it out.
Unless they've read the manual, which, as established, you have not.
I have not, and I refuse to apologize for it. Let's also address the misconception that more lumens means better flashlight, because I feel like we've been circling it but haven't hit it directly.
The lumen number is the most abused specification in the flashlight market. Here's why it's misleading. First, the peak number is typically measured at turn-on, before the thermal management kicks in and throttles the output. Many cheap lights hit their rated lumens for about 30 seconds. Second, lumens measure total light output, not useful illumination. A light with poor optics that scatters light in all directions might have high lumens, but terrible performance on the task you're actually doing. Third, for most practical indoor use cases, you don't need more than 300 to 500 lumens. Above that, you're bouncing light off walls and creating glare that actually makes it harder to see.
The high lumen number is essentially a marketing proxy for good flashlight in the minds of consumers who don't know what else to look for, and the industry has been happy to exploit that.
The better metrics for practical use are sustained output. What does the light actually deliver after 60 seconds of operation? Beam quality, which includes color rendering index and beam uniformity, and runtime, how long does it run at a usable output before needing a recharge? A light that does 400 lumens sustained for 3 hours is dramatically more useful than a light that does 2000 lumens for 30 seconds and then throttles to 100.
The CRI point is worth expanding on, because I think it's underappreciated. A high CRI light makes colors look natural, which matters more than you'd think when you're trying to identify things in the dark.
CRI, color rendering index, is a measure of how accurately a light source renders colors compared to natural daylight. A CRI of 100 is perfect daylight. Cheap lights often have a CRI in the 60s or 70s, which gives everything a slightly greenish or bluish cast and makes it harder to distinguish between similar colors. Quality lights from the brands we've discussed typically have CRI in the 80s to 90s. It's not a spec that gets marketed heavily, but it's one that you notice immediately when you use a high CRI light. Everything looks sharper and more natural.
In a practical context, being able to accurately read a label in the dark, distinguish between similar colored wires, or just see your environment clearly without a weird color cast, that's real value.
And it connects back to why the lumen race is a distraction. A 700 lumen high CRI light is more useful in most practical scenarios than a 2000 lumen low CRI light. The useful illumination is better even though the number is lower.
Let's talk about one more practical consideration before we wrap up, which is maintenance. Because a flashlight is a piece of equipment that requires some basic care.
This is brief but important. The main failure modes for quality lights are battery neglect and contact corrosion. For a light that uses removable cells, you want to check the battery every 6 months or so and top it off. Lithium-ion cells self-discharge slowly, but a cell that's been sitting at a low state of charge for 2 years will have degraded capacity. The O-rings that provide the waterproofing benefit from occasional lubrication with silicone grease, particularly if you're using the light in wet conditions. And the battery contacts should be kept clean. A quick wipe with a dry cloth every year is usually sufficient.
This is the kind of maintenance that takes 5 minutes a year, and is the difference between a light that works when you need it and one that doesn't.
The brands we've mentioned have excellent warranty support too. Phoenix in particular has a reputation for standing behind their products. If a light fails outside of user error, they'll sort it out.
Alright, let's also give some specific model recommendations, because I think the brand discussion is useful, but people want to know what to actually buy.
Sure. For a general home emergency and camping light, the Phoenix PD36R is the clearest recommendation. 21700 cell, USB-C charging built-in, 1600 lumens peak with sensible sustained output, IP68 waterproofing, and a straightforward interface. It's around $70 to $80, and it's the kind of light you buy once.
For someone who wants something more compact,
The Olight Batten 3 Pro. It's an 1860-50 light in an extremely compact package, magnetic charging, over 1000 lumens peak, and Olight's build quality is excellent. It's around $50 to $60. The magnetic charging is genuinely convenient for a light that gets used regularly.
for the professional or emergency kit context,
Streamlight ProTac 2 LX. It runs on CR123A primaries or an 18650 with an adapter. It's duty rated, it's used by professionals in high stakes environments, and it's in the $40 to $50 range. For a light that might sit in a go bag for 2 years and then need to work in a cold car, this is the one.
for the feature-seeking buyer,
Nitecore P23i if you want the integrated laser for professional use. It's around $80 to $90 and the laser integration is genuinely useful for inspection and pointing work. If you don't need the laser, the Nitecore P20i is a cleaner, simpler light at a lower price point.
and for the engineering obsessive,
Zebralight SC64W. It's an 1860-50 light with class, leading efficiency, potted electronics, and the most sophisticated thermal management in its class. The UI takes learning. The performance is exceptional. If you care about how the light actually works at an engineering level, Zebralight is the answer.
that's a solid lineup, one for every type of buyer.
The common thread is that all of them use replaceable standard cells. All of them have proper waterproofing, and all of them are from manufacturers with track records of standing behind their products. Those 3 criteria eliminate 90% of the market.
I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, which is the dual fuel concept, because I think it's actually a really important feature for a specific subset of buyers, and it deserves more attention.
The dual fuel concept is underrated in the preparedness community. The idea is simple. The light runs on a rechargeable lithium cell normally, but it can also run on standard alkaline batteries as a fallback. The Azabeam Pocolit AA and the ThruNite Archer 2A are great examples. The ThruNite Archer 2A is actually a classic recommendation for non-enthusiasts because it uses standard AA batteries, has a simple high-medium-low interface, and costs around $25 to $30. It's the exception to the $40 floor because it's genuinely well made for its price point, and the standard battery compatibility is real value.
The ThruNite is interesting because it's the recommendation for someone who doesn't want to think about any of this. Standard batteries, simple interface, proven reliability.
ThruNite is a brand I should have mentioned alongside the 5, honestly. They offer some of the best value to performance ratios in the market. The Archer 2 AV3 specifically has been recommended by Wirecutter and the flashlight community consistently. It's not the most exciting light, but it works. It uses batteries you can find anywhere, and it's accessible to someone who doesn't want to build a lithium-ion ecosystem.
This is actually a useful segmentation. If you're willing to invest in the rechargeable ecosystem, the Phoenix and Nidacor options are better tools. If you want something that runs on hardware store batteries and never requires thinking about chargers, the ThruNite Archer is the answer.
And neither answer is wrong. They solve different problems. The rechargeable ecosystem is better for a light you use regularly. The alkaline-compatible light is better for a light that's going to sit in a drawer for 2 years and needs to work when you pull it out.
All right. I think we've been thorough. Let's land this. What's the core thesis of this episode in a sentence or two?
A reliable handheld flashlight is cheap insurance, and the price of actually good insurance is $40 to $80. Spend that money on a brand with a track record. Prioritize replaceable cells over sealed batteries, match the beam pattern and features to your actual use case, and ignore the lumen arms race. The light that works at 2 in the morning is the only light that matters.
And the audit point. Check your flashlights. Right now, after this episode, pull them out of the drawer, click them on, check the batteries. If they fail that basic test, that's the signal to upgrade.
The thing I keep coming back to is that flashlights occupy this weird category where people consistently underspend because they don't seem important until they're critical, and then they're critical at the worst possible moment. A $50 investment in a Phoenix or a Streamlight is one of the highest value preparedness decisions you can make, because the gap between that light working and not working is the gap between a manageable situation and a genuinely stressful one.
The stakes are low enough that people don't think about it, and high enough that they should. That's the whole tension.
And there's a future trajectory worth noting here. LED efficiency is continuing to improve, which means the next generation of lights will offer better sustained output and longer runtime at the same price points. The 21700 ecosystem is maturing, cells are getting better and more available. Smart features, charging indicators, battery level displays are becoming standard rather than premium. The fundamentals we've discussed, replaceable cells, quality build, sensible beam, aren't going away, but the ceiling on what you get at $50 keeps rising.
The physics of light and how LEDs actually work is a whole separate conversation that we've gone deep on before. But the short version is that the efficiency gains in LED technology over the last 15 years have been extraordinary, and there's still headroom to improve.
The one open question I'd leave listeners with is this: what's the most unusual or genuinely effective use case you found for a specialized flashlight feature? The red light for night vision, the laser for signaling or pointing, the flood beam for a specific task. The community knowledge around this stuff is genuinely impressive, and I think most of us underutilize the tools we have.
Send us your answers. We're at show@myweirdprompts.com if you want to share. Alright, that's our episode. Huge thanks to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping this whole operation running. And big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. If you're enjoying my weird prompts, a quick review on your podcast app helps us reach new listeners more than almost anything else. This has been my weird prompts. We'll see you next time.
See you then.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow and follow through. My weird prompts